Hi, this is Julia with Stork'd, the podcast which explores the many paths to building family. I have Jamie and Christian here today to talk with us about how they have constructed a polyamorous relationship that really works for them. They are actually sitting on a park bench outside, which is the coolest way I think I've ever conducted an interview. And so you might hear some birds or some car noises, and it's all part of the fun. What I love about these two is how much they adore, admire, and support one another. There are so many elements of their relationship that I would consider like hashtag relationship goals. Those are tenderness, thoughtfulness, a clear and honest communication, sincere trust, and I think like a delight in one another, which for me are the adjectives I look for in all of my relationships, romantic or otherwise. The reason I wanted to share their story is because it's such a great example of constructing the life that you want and the relationships you want. The intention of this podcast is to create permission to define or redefine your family according to your own true north. And their relationship is really such a cool example of carving a path that is uniquely yours. Rather than accept the status quo without question, they redefine the rules for themselves, or essentially build the ship as they sail it. It was really illuminating to listen to them and think about the many ways in which I may have just accepted rules. Christian calls them the training wheels. I may have accepted the training wheels that were handed to me rather than build my own path. And I see a lot of myself in their story. Even if their approach to what makes them happy isn't the same as what makes me happy, there is a lot about their story that I found personally very relatable and almost just universal. So here are Jamie and Christian. Welcome, guys. How are you?
Hi, Julia.
Good. How are you?
Good. Christian, Jamie, tell us a little bit about yourselves.
Hi, my name's Christian. I work in tech, and I dance and write when I can make the time for it.
That's great.
And my name's Jamie. I'm a local. I was born in the North Shore and have been living in and around Boston for a very long time. And I've been dating this guy for about 2.5 years now.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. I'm just so excited to have people who are in a relationship with one another on this podcast today. And so before we get started, Jamie, can you tell us a little bit about what you adore about Christian?
Go on.
How much time do we have? Because this could take a while. So some of the many things that I love about Christian: he feels very easy to be with. I feel very comfortable around him, whether it's just sitting in silence or talking. I think we have a similar sense of humor and a lot of activities that we enjoy in common. And he's really cute. So.
Yeah.
Oh, shucks.
And Christian, the same question for you. Tell us what you adore about Jamie.
Yeah, I think for me, it's the same thing. I think what sort of sealed the deal for me in terms of wanting to explore and deepen the relationship was just this feeling of deep comfort and safety that I had around Jamie. And it's not necessarily just in the physical sense, but in an emotional sense. There are some folks who make you just sort of feel more okay with, letting your hair down, your proverbial hair down. And that's definitely something that I found to be true with Jamie.
Well, that's great. Can you guys describe a little bit about your relationship? Specifically, you guys are in a polyamorous relationship. Can you explain what that means for you two?
Sure. I'm kind of curious, actually, to hear your answer to this, since you're newer.
Yeah, for me, for many years, I'd been dating in monogamous relationships, which is, how I thought that was pretty much the only choice that was available. And they just never really felt comfortable for me. They felt too restricted and too sort of all-encompassing, overwhelming. So when I first met Christian, we met online, and I had read in his profile that he was in a polyamorous relationship. I didn't really know what it meant, but I think how I've come to understand it is that people in polyamorous relationships, they can actually take, many different forms according to the people participating. But The idea, as I understand it, is that the people involved have permission to date other people, to fall in love with other people, while still maintaining a loving, committed relationship to their primary partner.
Christian, how does that resonate with your definition of polyamorous relationships?
That sounds really, spot on. So I said Jamie was newer to it because this is his, I guess, first polyamorous relationship. For me, it's only my second. I feel like in a lot of ways I'm still very new to polyamory, even though my other current relationship has been going on for about 7 years. A lot of what that means to me is sort of what Jamie said. It's a lot like, and I sort of hesitate to use this terminology because I found that a lot of people find it a little bit demeaning, but it's kind of like a monogamous relationships, but without the training wheels, without the safety rails. I mean, there's more freedom to do what might be, what might fit for you, but there's also more room to screw up, to make mistakes and get hurt. And I think that is a freedom that I have learned to appreciate and really thrive in, but it's not necessarily like the best scenario for all people. It's something that I have found works very well for me, though, in terms of the freedom to define your relationships as you see fit, and sort of descriptively rather than prescriptively.
I have a lot of questions about what you just said. Let's start with the training wheels concept. I think that's a really interesting and beautiful analogy. In what ways do you think a monogamous relationship has training wheels or has like bumpers in bowling?
Yeah, it sort of is a lot like that. And I would say that that's the way that that's the case is just because of the kind of monogamous default. The fact that monogamous relationships are not merely sort of celebrated in our culture, but are in fact treated as often the only type of relationship, and that the very existence of valid polyamorous relationships is itself comes as kind of a surprise or a shock to many people. And I think that has allowed a lot of things to accrue around monogamous relationships that aren't necessarily a part of monogamy itself. There are these kinds of implicit rules and unspoken boundaries and the assumptions about you should know that X, Y, and Z aren't okay, and that A, B, and C are definitely expected of you, without having explicitly had those conversations with your partner. It's to the point where we have like many different talk shows and advice columns all about like what is and isn't cheating, as if that's going to be just, there is some kind of platonic ideal that defines cheating for all people in all times and places, as opposed to what causes the people in the relationship to feel betrayed. It sort of, it becomes kind of more and more about these rules and regulations that the people in the relationship had no part in making.
So sort of like a one-size-fits-all.
Yeah.
So are you saying that there are no rules in polyamorous relationships, or that the rules are made up as you go along? Tell us about how the structure works.
So in polyamorous relationships, it's much more the latter. I mean, I don't like to use the word rules, mainly because I have always felt that rules are for people you don't trust, and if you don't trust the person you're in a relationship with, then maybe you shouldn't be in that relationship. That's, sort of my opinion, I guess. But yeah, I think that there are certainly, though, agreements and understandings that people come to in polyamorous relationships, but those are often different. I guess I can't even say that they're often different. Those can be different from the rules that end up governing monogamous relationships, but often I find that the biggest difference between them is just the fact that the expectations, the agreements, the rules, the mutual understandings that you have in a polyamorous relationship are often necessarily explicit. They have been actively and explicitly brought up and discussed and agreed upon by the people in the relationship, as opposed to kind of depending on, I guess, cultural norms or other sort of outside forces to define that for them.
If I'm paraphrasing, or if I'm hearing you correct, tell me if this understanding makes sense. It's almost like you're saying that you step into a monogamous relationship and there's a set of expectations and rules that you can just jump into because they already exist. And in a polyamorous relationship, it sounds like you step in and together you form the confines or the structure, or what the look and feel of the relationship is. Does that sound like what you're saying?
Close. I wouldn't say that monogamous relationships actually do come with all of these things built in, but they're sort of advertised like that. That's how we treat monogamous relationships, I think, especially in like media and pop culture. The idea of all romantic relationships is that they have some sort of playbook, that there's a right way of doing them, which, of course, isn't really the case. Every relationship is ideally defined by the people who are in it, and I think that's totally possible within monogamous relationships, but it's something that people are not encouraged to do and are often discouraged from doing, I think. Whereas with polyamory, it's kind of the only option. There is no sort of playbook for polyamory because of the fact that it's so uncommon, and so you are in this position where you have the responsibility to sort of hammer out what boundaries are going to work for you, but you also have the freedom to hammer out what boundaries are going to work for you.
Okay, so that's actually very clarifying. Thank you. Are you guys open to sharing some of the agreements or freedoms or boundaries that you guys have chosen to put in your relationship?
Sure.
Yeah. I think from the beginning we have, and throughout, we have said that we're not sexually exclusive. Although I don't know, for me it has been more so than not. I have dated a couple of other guys at the same time that I've been dating Christian, although at the moment I'm not. I guess in terms of like how often we see each other and what context, seems like we almost figure that out from week to week sometimes, but both our work situations and living situations have changed a bit over the 2.5 years we've known each other.
Yeah. We've pretty well established that we're not sexually exclusive. We don't have much in the way of real, I guess, rules around that. Largely, I trust Jamie to be responsible with his sexual partners and vice versa. And, we keep each other updated on any risks or exposure that may have occurred. It's one of these things that is just a matter of trust and sort of continual communication. We keep each other updated on our respective sex lives and dating lives. I guess we don't really have much in the way of established rules about detail. I tend to go into detail. I don't think Jamie really does. It's not really his thing.
I was going to ask about that. In fact, I did ask Jamie the other day when we were talking about this. Like, sometimes in relationships, you risk being too honest, right? Because sometimes you can hurt somebody by being too honest. What are the boundaries around how much you share or don't share? Like, do you ever risk that?
I don't feel like we do. I feel like we're generally, when we care about each other, and I think, as I mentioned, our similar senses of humor before, I think we're both pretty willing to laugh at almost anything, including ourselves. So there's not, I feel in terms of honesty, even outside of our relationship, I rarely feel like I would be so bluntly honest with a family member or a friend where it's about something that's insulting. If I feel like it's something that's of concern to their health or their well-being, I might say something, but I try to be as diplomatic as possible. And I try to do that in all contexts, not just with Christian.
All couples have arguments or disagreements or moments of stress and strain. Is there a recent example of one that came up for you as a result of the porousness of the relationship?
Porousness.
I don't know, is that a good word? I don't, or the specific way in which you've defined and created and constructed your relationship?
Yeah, I like the word porousness.
Okay.
I mean, I can think of a couple examples. I don't feel like they were super serious. One time we were going for a hike, and I like to stand sort of on the edge of a rock over a really high ravine and look out. And Christian's not a big fan of heights, so that didn't go over so well. So I learned that. And I think sometimes I can be fairly controlling, and it's not something I love about myself, but once or twice Christian has actually pointed it out, because it's been, I think that's obvious. I guess you probably noticed it more than once, but
It's interesting because I would assume that somebody who is naturally controlling and has the self-reflection to admit that they're naturally controlling may not choose a relationship where you can't control your partner's behavior outside of the relationship. How do you manage those two sides of yourself?
I don't know. I don't like the controlling thing, so I'm trying to just stay aware of it and not do it. Sometimes it's easier said than done, but
I feel like it's kind of true in every relationship.
Yeah, I want to talk specifically about the beginnings of your relationship because, Christian, you introduced Jamie to the concept of polyamorousness. Is that the right way? Of the way a polyamorous relationship might look. How did that early conversation go? How does one introduce another person to this structure?
So Christian and I met on Christmas Eve of 2017. And we didn't really talk much. I don't think we talked much about polyamory the first night because we were busy doing other stuff.
One or two other things.
But, as we kept seeing each other and getting to know each other, I started asking Christian some questions about what was polyamory, what did it mean, how did he define it. I remember one of the questions I asked, because I'm sure like when we first talked and a lot of people who first hear about it, they're like, well, how can you love more than one person? Because I think what our society teaches, that you grow up, you find the one, and ideally you find the one and you stay with the one.
Until death do you part.
And so the example that Christian gave me is, do you have more than one sibling? And I do. I said, yes. He said, do you love just one of them or do you love all of them? I love all of them, of course. I go, why can't that be true in a romantic or an intimate relationship as well? And I didn't really have a good answer as to why it couldn't be the case. So, yeah.
That's a good analogy. Christian, I know you currently love two men, or you've mentioned two men.
Yeah.
Do you love them in the same way, or is the love different?
It is different. I mean, they're different people, so obviously the ways in which I love them are different. I can't really love the same things about them because they don't have the same things about them. Jamie's taller, But yeah, and I would say, though, that I love them equally. I don't see my love for one of them as more important than my love for the other. I don't see one relationship as more important than the other. And I think that is a pretty, to me, that's a really crucial part of the way in which I do polyamory. And, my other partner, Curtis, sort of introduced me to that idea as well. Because there are a lot of folks where they'll have like a primary relationship, they'll call it, with one other person. And then, secondary relationships with various other people. But I feel like, treating someone else as secondary, especially if they didn't have any say in that designation, is more than a little insulting.
It's a harsh thing to say.
Yeah, I feel like don't nobody want to be a side chick, So yeah, and I feel like just in general, it's kind of a shitty way of treating these relationships, and also not necessarily true. My relationship with Curtis has gone on longer than my relationship with Jamie, but that doesn't make it more important or more meaningful or more, central to my life. I mean, That's not how these things are measured, basically. I mean, that's not how that works. And it's important to allow for the fact that these relationships also change over time.
Both of the relationships you're in are long-term. I would define them as long-term relationships, 7 years and 2.5 years.
I'd say you're right about that.
And I'm curious if there's something about a polyamorous relationship that lends itself to being long-term because of the way in which you are redefining the rules consistently.
Yeah, that speaks to me. I know clearly Christian wants to say something about that too, but I think for me, and like we were talking about sort of the assumptions and restrictions that go along with the monogamous relationships, or that that we assume go along with them. I think part of that, that idea of a one size fits all, it's not true. One size clearly does not fit all, because every individual is different. And so two people in a relationship, or more than two people in a relationship, are different. And so I think the greater freedom and the greater, I would say, awareness that comes with polyamory, because you have to think about and talk about, like, what is this going to look like for us? Because, the people involved have worked through that, hopefully, then it does lend itself more to, like, if there are misunderstandings, they don't seem catastrophic, because, I don't know, the stakes don't seem to be so high. I'm not sure what I'm trying to say. Like if, let's say you're in a monogamous, supposedly, or an alleged monogamous relationship with somebody, and one of the people has sex with somebody outside the relationship, that could be relationship ending. But if you've agreed to, either as a two-person couple or as a larger polyamorous group, these are the things that we're comfortable with, like sex outside, dating outside, then you're ready for that. It doesn't seem so terrible, world ending if it happened.
We've talked around this quite a few times, but I have to ask it as directly as possible because I just think it's human nature to be jealous. How do you guys navigate jealousy, and how do you build trust?
Yeah, so this was actually probably maybe the second question I think that Jamie asked me about. And of course, it comes up a lot. And the way that I sort of to answer that question is the same way that people deal with jealousy in monogamous relationships. I mean, one of the most common ways I end up describing polyamory is that there are no special skills involved. It's all of the exact same stuff that you need to do in a monogamous relationship, or ideally should be doing in a monogamous relationship. You just end up doing more of it. There are more people involved. And managing jealousy is absolutely one of those things. It's, obviously starts with acknowledging the fact that jealousy is a feeling. So, your partner is not making you jealous, although, maybe you will feel jealousy because of some things that they're doing. And simultaneously, you are not responsible for never feeling jealous because you don't get to control that. You don't get to decide whether feelings of jealousy come up or not. What you do get to decide is what to do about them. And ideally, one of the things that you're able to do about that is to communicate about it with your partner. Let your partner know that I'm having, these feelings of jealousy, and they're a problem. Like, I'm working through them, and, I may or may not need support with that. Often there are things that you can do or talk about or work on with your partner that will end up helping to relieve those feelings. But I think approaching it as a problem for you to work on together, as opposed to a problem that one of you is creating and needs to resolve, or some kind of conflict between you, is kind of the deciding factor in terms of dealing with jealousy in a healthy way. And lastly, often what it comes down to is the time and emotional energy that your partner is spending on somebody else. And I often sort of describe that, as the same things can happen in a monogamous relationship. If somebody's time and energy are consumed by their job, or with taking care of a family if they're raising a family, or caring for a sick or elderly family member, if they're, deeply involved in a cause that's extremely important to them. There are any number of things that can draw that attention away from you and cause you to not get the kind of emotional attention and energy that you need out of the relationship. But I think that the cause is less important than the way in which you end up dealing with it.
Yeah. So it's so interesting because both of you are so good at naming and identifying your emotions. Is that like a prerequisite for being in a polyamorous relationship?
Definitely helps. I don't know. It's one of those things that comes with practice, though, I think, and you do end up getting a lot of practice with it.
Both of you at separate times have mentioned that this fits for certain people. How do you know that it fits for you, and how would somebody who's thinking about it know whether or not it fits for them? What kind of person is this the right choice for?
My thought was that, it's right for you if it feels right for you, and if you try it out and it still feels right for you. And if it doesn't, maybe it will be some other time, or maybe you just want a monogamous relationship, because I think that some people do want that. Not everybody, but
absolutely. Oh yeah.
I don't think there's any you could say like, oh, this demographic is who it's right for, but it could conceivably be anybody.
Jamie, how did it feel stepping into this? Because you're the newest in this.
Yeah, it was. I wasn't sure about it at first. That's partly why I asked Christian some of the questions I did. Christian was very open about it, and so was Curtis. Although I'm not dating Curtis also. We've become friends, and I feel very comfortable around the both of them. So I sort of feel like part of their family.
You've been very open with me and with our audience about your relationship and the structure of your relationship. Are you equally as open with friends and family members? And how does that first conversation go?
I've been pretty open about it with my family, both my siblings and my friends. And often I'll get like some kind of good-natured teasing or like blank looks or what I would call stupid questions. But even though I know a good teacher says there are no stupid questions, but I had some of these same questions too. So yeah, so I just kind of explain it pretty much the way I understand it. And I think both my family and my friends have come to, pretty quickly to accept it and not, a lot of them just ask how Chris is doing and all that. So
yeah, actually, I think one of the most interesting stories I have about that is, or when other poly folks, ask about, talking about this sort of thing with their families, the example that I use is one from that my other partner Curtis used when describing it to his family, because, he was dating two guys at the time, and, at some point explained to his family, I'm polyamorous, and, blah, 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 and his mother just blew up and had a fit and was absolutely not having any of it, condemned the whole thing. And then a few months later, one of his partners couldn't come to a wedding of, when his sister or his cousin or something. And so he brought his best friend instead of his other partner. And his mother asked, well, why not? Why didn't you bring, your other partner? And he said, well, last time we talked about this, you were totally not okay with it. And she said, oh, no, you just called it something weird. So that kind of is sort of the crux of it. I mean, I don't usually use words like there's some, vocabulary around polyamory that a lot of people like to use, and I don't. But words like compersion, just the word polyamory, metamor, and all of this can sort of make people feel like they're out of the loop, or like this is more somehow alien than it really is. Whereas the way I've discussed it with my family is just to say, like, I'm dating Curtis, yeah, and I'm also dating Jamie.
If you were to define it in a sentence or two for our audience, how would you define polyamorousness or polyamorous relationships?
I would say it's just the willingness and the ability to date and love and be with more than one person at a time. Like,
yeah.
And in a relationship with somebody who is similarly willing and able.
Yeah, I would say that it's the willingness and ability and responsibility to be engaged romantically with more than one person at a time, and to allow your relationships to grow without how to put it?
Don't say organically.
To grow not organically, but without sort of arbitrary restrictions.
Okay.
To grow with mindfully, I guess.
Wow. So I have one more question, two more questions. The first is, I imagine that there's a lot of misperception about what a polyamorous relationship is in the world. Is there anything that you wish that people or our audience knew that would sort of address some of those misconceptions?
I guess for me, not anything in particular. I wish, listeners know, but just that they be willing to listen and learn. I mean, that's really, I think that's really the best way to go through life. You can't really understand somebody's experience unless you do that. So,
yeah. I guess what I wish people understood more clearly is just that I kind of already worked it in there. I like it. But yeah, that, polyamorous relationships don't require anything different than monogamous relationships. Communication is key, respect is foundational, trust is essential. And, you don't have to do anything different than you would do in a monogamous relationship, but you do end up having to do more of it because you're doing it with more than one person. And that's really the only difference. A functional and healthy polyamorous relationship will look exactly the same as a functional and healthy monogamous relationship in terms of the essential ingredients, the trust, the communication, the respect, that's necessarily involved.
And does that mean that an unfunctional or dysfunctional polyamorous relationship looks the same as a dysfunctional monogamous relationship, or is the dysfunction different?
I mean, there's all shapes and sizes of train wreck,
That's true. I think you probably just described my dating life in one sentence. All shapes and sizes of train wreck.
that could be said of many of us.
Autobiography. Yeah.
Autobiography title right there. Okay, so let's wrap up with, is there anything I didn't ask that you'd like to share either about the two of you, your relationship, polyamorous relationships, or anything else that you want to share today?
I guess what I'd like to say is I feel, not that I generally don't subscribe to the idea of like everything happens for a reason, as in like a predefined, predestined reason, but I feel very fortunate that I met Christian and Curtis, and I don't know, it's been this has been the longest intimate relationship I've had, and I really dig it. So.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. I guess the thing that I've learned the most from being in a polyamorous relationship is just about relationships in general, and about how I need to be kind of responsible for shaping the relationships that I have and for responding to them appropriately. I think it's easy to think of your relationships as kind of prepackaged, I guess, and they never really are, but I think that's become a lot more clear to me because of being in a polyamorous relationship. And it takes a lot of work to learn those lessons, but it's definitely been worth it.
That's great. I actually lied when I said there was only one more question. One more question, because I always forget this one, and this one is one that I'm supposed to be doing as a wrap up to the whole thing. But this podcast, as you know, is about family loosely defined, and specifically it's about the way in which we get to create our own definitions of family, because so many of us see the heteronormative white picket fence, 2.5 kids, and I'm trying to share stories of all the other ways you can create family, because for me at least, it's been helpful in figuring out what's right for me. And so you guys, thank you so much. You've done such a tremendous job of talking about your relationship as family and the way in which you've created something really special for you. So as a close, would you mind sharing with me in one word or a couple words what your definition of family is. What does family mean to you?
I feel like for me, family is the people who, it may sound trite, but people who love you unconditionally and accept you unconditionally and vice versa. And I feel like I've been very blessed that way with my biological and my chosen family.
Okay, but in 1 or 2 words, though.
1 or 2 words?
Yeah.
Yeah, although that was a really nice sentiment, so we can keep that.
Okay.
Christian's pushing it. He's like, do it.
Do it.
Yeah, just mutual love and acceptance, whatever the family looks like.
I would say belonging. Just a place where you are wholly wanted. You are wanted and needed, the whole person that you are, and not just in bits and pieces.
Well, that one's going to make me cry. All right. Thank you guys so much for your time today. It was a really special conversation and made doubly special by having both 2 guests and 2 guests who were willing to sit on a bench and have this conversation with me today. So thank you so much.
Welcome.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to Stork'd with your host, Julia Carroll. This podcast is changing the conversation around the ways people define and create family. For more information, visit storkedpodcast.com to sign up for our newsletter. And while you're there, leave us a message describing what a modern family means to you. That's STORKD podcast.com.